I'm Jill Thomas, 32, and I thought I knew what friendship meant. For 8 years, I'd been there for Sarah through every heartbreak, every job loss, every midnight crisis call. So when she got engaged, I didn't hesitate to offer the one thing I could give her that no one else could. $15,000 wedding of her dreams, funded by my freelance graphic design savings. The morning of her wedding, I stood outside the bridal, sweet in my carefully chosen dress, holding her something borrowed earrings, ready to celebrate the woman I considered my sister. That's when I heard her voice through the door, crystal clear and cutting. Jill? Oh God, no, I couldn't let her be in the wedding party. She's so awkward and embarrassing. I mean, she paid for everything, so we had to invite her, but imagine the photos. The laughter that followed shattered something inside me I didn't even know could break. But what I discovered in the weeks that followed would reveal the true cost of my generosity and change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, friendship, and my own worth. The world tilted sideways. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, clutching those borrowed earrings so tightly they left marks on my palm. The laughter continued from behind the door, Sarah's bridesmaids joining in like a chorus of cruelty. I mean, she's sweet and all, Sarah's voice carried on. But you know how she gets at parties. Remember her birthday last year? She spilled wine on herself and then cried in the bathroom for 20 minutes. More laughter. My cheeks burned with the memory. I'd been overwhelmed that night, touched that so many people had come to celebrate with me. The wine had been an accident, and yes, I had gotten emotional in the bathroom, but because I felt so grateful for friendship, not embarrassed about a simple spill. Plus, look at my other bridesmaids, Sarah continued. They're all so put together. Jill would have stuck out like a sore thumb. I couldn't breathe. 8 months ago, when Sarah had called me sobbing because her parents refused to help with wedding costs, I hadn't hesitated. How much do you need? I'd asked, already calculating what I could liquidate from my carefully built savings account. $15,000 would cover everything, she'd whispered through tears. But, Jill, I could never ask you for that much. You're not asking, I'd said firmly. I'm offering. You're my best friend, Sarah. You'd do the same for me. The gratitude. In her voice that day, it felt so genuine. Jill, you're saving my entire future. I'll never forget this. You're going to be my maid of honor, and we'll plan the most beautiful wedding together. But there had been no maid of honor invitation. Just weeks later, she casually mentioned that her college roommate Emma would be taking that role. You understand, right? We have so much history. When I'd swallowed my disappointment and asked about being a bridesmaid, she'd gotten vague. The thing is, I already asked my cousins, and you know how family is. Standing in that hallway listening to her real reasons, I felt something fundamental crack inside me. The bank transfer receipt was still in my phone. $15,000 moved from my business savings to her checking account in a single transaction. Money I'd earned designing logos late into the night, creating websites for small businesses, building my freelance career penny by penny. I told myself her exclusion was about logistics, about family obligations. I convinced myself that funding her dream wedding was enough, that being her friend didn't require a place in the wedding party. But now I knew the truth. I was too embarrassing, too awkward. Good enough to bankroll her perfect day, but not. Good enough to stand beside her during it. The door handle turned. I hurried down the hallway, my heart hammering before anyone could see me. But I couldn't unsee what I discovered. Sarah had taken my generosity and used it to create a wedding where I was both essential and unwanted. A patron who'd purchased her own humiliation. I drove home in a daze, Sarah's words echoing in my head. In my apartment, I pulled out the photo album I'd been planning to give her as a wedding gift. 8 years of friendship chronicled in pictures and memories. Now each photo felt like evidence of my own foolishness. There we were at 24, fresh out of college, both struggling in our first apartments. When Sarah couldn't make rent that second month, I covered it without question. Just until I get back on my feet, she'd promised. She never paid me back, but I told myself money wasn't important between real friends. The next photo showed us at her 26th birthday party, the expensive dinner she'd insisted on at that trendy downtown restaurant. When the bill came, she'd looked at me with those big, helpless eyes. "I'm so sorry, Jill. I completely miscalculated." I put the entire $300 tab on my credit card while she promised to make it up to me somehow. She never did. Page after page revealed the same pattern. Sarah's job interview outfit, purchased on my credit card because I'll pay you back as soon as I get hired. The security deposit for her better apartment when she decided to move up in the world. The weekend getaway to celebrate her promotion, which somehow became my treat when she forgot her wallet. I'd always rationalized it. Sarah was beautiful, charming, the kind of person who lit up every room she entered. Being her friend made me feel special, like some of her magic might rub off on me. When people saw us together, I felt interesting by association. Her problems became my projects, and fixing them made me feel needed. But looking at these photos now, I saw something different. In every single picture, Sarah was perfectly posed, radiant, confident. And there I was beside her, reliable, practical Jill, always slightly out of place, but trying so hard to belong. The supporting character in her story. I remembered the night. She met David, her now husband. We'd been at a bar, and I'd watched her work her charm on him while I sat forgotten at our table, guarding her purse and our drinks. When she disappeared with him, leaving me to get home alone, I told myself I was happy for her. Love was more important than one awkward evening. Their entire relationship had followed the same pattern. When she needed someone to drive her to David's family events because she was too nervous to go alone, I was there. When she wanted advice on handling his difficult mother, I spent hours helping her strategize. When they had fights and she needed somewhere to stay, my couch was always available. During their engagement, I'd throw myself into helping with every detail. I'd spent countless weekends driving her to venue visits, tasting cakes, and shopping for the perfect dress. I'd listened to her stress about seating charts and helped her manage vendor communications. I'd been more involved in planning her wedding than some of her actual bridesmaids, and through it all, I told myself this was what friendship looked like. This was love in action, putting someone else's happiness before your own, sacrificing your time and money for their dreams. But Sarah's words had shattered that beautiful lie. I wasn't her cherished friend. I was her convenient benefactor. I wasn't family. I was a resource. The woman I'd supported and celebrated for 8 years saw me as an embarrassment, someone to be hidden away despite my contributions to her happiness. The photo album slipped from my hands, pictures scattering across my coffee table. 8 years of one-sided devotion stared back at me, and for the first time I saw the truth. I hadn't been living a friendship. I'd been funding one. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to go to the wedding. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with Sarah's wedding planning binder, the one I'd organized and maintained for months. Every vendor contact, every timeline, every detail was in my handwriting. The irony wasn't lost on me. I planned a wedding I was too embarrassing to participate in. I flipped through pages of my own meticulous notes. The florist consultation where Sarah had been 20 minutes late, leaving me to discuss arrangements and negotiate prices. The cake tasting where she'd spent the entire time on her phone while I took notes on flavors and fillings. The venue. Walk through where the coordinator had actually started addressing me directly because Sarah kept getting distracted by wedding dress photos on Instagram. "You're so organized," the venue manager had told me. "Sarah's lucky to have such a dedicated maid of honor." I corrected her then, explaining I was just helping as a friend. The woman had looked confused. "Oh, I just assumed. You seem to know more about this wedding than anyone else." She'd been right. I knew Sarah wanted white roses, not pink, because she'd mentioned it once and I'd written it down. I knew she preferred buttercream to fondant because I'd researched cake options. When she said she was too overwhelmed to choose, I knew her color scheme, her timeline, her guest dietary restrictions, her transportation needs, because I made it my business to know. The bridesmaids, meanwhile, had shown up to exactly 3 events: the engagement party, the bridal shower, and the bachelorette party. They'd contributed group gifts and worn their assigned dresses, but they couldn't have told you Sarah's middle name or her greatest fear about the wedding day. They were props in her perfect photos. I was the stage manager making sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. I remembered the vendor meetings Sarah would miss, texting me last-minute apologies. Something came up with work. Can you handle the caterer today? You know what I like? I'd rearranged my client meetings, driven across town, and made decisions about her wedding because she trusted my judgment or because she knew. I'd clean up whatever mess she left behind. The catering contract was signed in my name because I'd been the one present for the final details. The photographer knew my number by heart because I was the one who answered when problems arose. The DJ had my playlist preferences saved because Sarah had never responded to his emails about music selections. Even the wedding favors, small packets of wildflower seeds with custom labels, had been my idea. Sarah had loved it, of course, but left the ordering and pickup entirely to me. I'd spent my Saturday morning assembling 200 little packages while she got her nails done with her bridesmaids. Looking through this binder now, I saw the truth of our relationship lay bare. I hadn't just funded Sarah's wedding. I'd practically planned it single-handedly. I'd been more invested in our special day than she was, more concerned with the details, more committed to making everything perfect. The vendors all knew me. The venue coordinator had my emergency contact information. The rental company had delivered everything to my apartment for inspection before transport to the venue. In every practical sense, this had been my wedding to plan and execute for someone else's happiness. And yet, when it came time for photos, for memories, for the moments that would be preserved forever, I was too embarrassing to include. Sarah had wanted my labor, my money, my expertise, my dedication, everything except my presence in her perfect day. I closed the binder and felt something shift inside me. For months, I'd been proud of my behind-the-scenes contributions, telling myself that real friendship didn't need recognition. But now I understood I hadn't been treated like a friend at all. I'd been treated like hired help who worked for free dot by Monday. I still hadn't heard from Sarah. No thank you text for funding her dream wedding. Number apology for the cruel words I'd overheard. No acknowledgement that I'd even existed during her special day. The silence was deafening. I decided to reach out to Emma, Sarah's college roommate and maid of honor. Maybe she could help me understand what had happened, or at least confirm that I hadn't imagined the conversation outside the bridal. Sweet. Jill, how are you? Emma's voice was carefully neutral when she answered my call. I'm fine. I was just wondering how the wedding went. I had to leave early. There was a pause. Oh, it was beautiful. Sarah looked amazing. I'm sure she did. Listen, Emma, I overheard something at the wedding that's been bothering me. Sarah was talking about why I wasn't in the wedding party and, oh, Emma's voice dropped. You heard that? My stomach sank. So it's true? She really said I was too embarrassing? Emma sighed heavily. Jill, I'm sorry you heard it that way. Sarah was just stressed. You know how brides get. Stressed enough to call her best friend embarrassing after she paid for the entire wedding? Wait, you paid for the whole thing? Emma sounded genuinely surprised. Sarah told us her parents were covering most of it. The lie hit me like a physical blow. No, Emma, I gave her $15,000. I covered everything venue, catering, flowers, photography, everything. Jesus, Jill, I had no idea. Emma's voice was quiet now. That explains a lot, actually. What do you mean? Some of the things Sarah said during the bachelorette party, about how you were so needy and always trying to buy friendship. I thought she was being harsh, but if she was lying about who paid for the wedding, my hands were shaking. She said I was trying to buy friendship? Jill, I'm really sorry. I should have said something, but I thought it was just pre-wedding nerves making her mean. After hanging up with Emma, I called Rebecca, another mutual friend who'd been at the wedding. The conversation followed a similar pattern shock about the money, uncomfortable admissions about Sarah's comments. She's always talked about you differently when you're not around, Rebecca finally admitted. I thought it was just, I don't know, normal friend stuff. But hearing about the money changes everything. What kind of things did she say? Rebecca hesitated. She used to joke about how you'd do anything for her. How you were always so eager to help, like a puppy following her around. I thought it was harmless teasing, but now it seems cruel. That evening, I called my friend Maya, who'd known both. Sarah and me since college, but had drifted away from Sarah over the years. I wondered when you'd finally see it. Mia said bluntly when I told her what had happened. Jill, Sarah has been using you for years. I stopped hanging out with her because I got tired of watching her treat you like a TM with legs. Why didn't you ever say anything? Would you have listened? You were so convinced she was this amazing friend. Every time I tried to point out how one-sided things were, you defend her. Maya was right. I remember conversations where she gently suggested that Sarah took advantage of my generosity, and I dismissed her concerns as jealousy. She did the same thing to our roommate's sophomore year. Maya continued. Borrowed money, used her. Carr had her write papers, and then dropped her completely when she found a more useful friend group. I'm not the first person she's done this to. Honey, you're just the latest. Sarah collects people who can give her things money, connections, services. When they stop being useful or start expecting reciprocity, she moves on. I spent the rest of the week reaching out to other friends, piecing together a pattern I'd been too close to see. Sarah had a history of intensive friendships that burned bright and ended badly. She'd had a best friend before me who'd helped her through college financially, only to be dropped when Sarah met more glamorous friends. She'd had mentors who'd opened doors for her career, then been dismissed when she no longer needed their guidance. The most damning evidence came from Lisa, who'd worked with Sarah 2 jobs ago. She used to complain about you constantly, Lisa told me over coffee. How you were always trying to insert yourself into her life, how you were desperate for attention. I always wondered why she stayed friends with you if she felt that way, but now I get it. You were funding her lifestyle. Each conversation was like a small death, killing the friendship I thought we had and revealing the transactional relationship that had actually existed. I wasn't Sarah's beloved best friend. I was her most reliable resource. She kept me close because I was useful, not because she valued me as a person. The screenshots Emma finally sent me were the final nail in the coffin text messages from Sarah to the bridesmaids group chat during wedding planning. Jill is being so clingy about this wedding stuff. Like, I get that she paid for it, but that doesn't mean she gets to control everything. Sometimes I think she forgets it's my wedding, not hers. Another message from a few weeks earlier. Ooh, Jill wants to come to the dress fitting. I'll have to tell her the appointment got moved. I can't deal with her getting emotional and making it all about her, and worst of all, from the day before the wedding. Thank God this will all be over soon and I can get some distance from Jill. David thinks I should cut her off completely after the honeymoon. She's getting too attached. I stared at those messages until my eyes burned. 8 years of friendship reduced to calculations about my usefulness and plans for my disposal. I'd been living in a completely different relationship than the one that actually existed. The screenshots had shattered my last illusions about Sarah, but they'd also sparked something else, a burning need to know exactly how she used my money. If I was going to be discarded after years of financial support, I wanted to understand the full scope of what I'd funded. I pulled out every receipt, every email confirmation, every vendor contract from the wedding planning process. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. The venue rental had been $4,200, but Sarah had told me it was $5,000. The catering was $3,800, but she claimed $4,500. The photography package was $2,100, not the $2,800 she quoted me. Line by line, I uncovered a pattern of inflated cost when I added up the real expenses. Sarah's wedding had cost $11,400, not the $15,000 I'd given her. She'd pocketed $3,600 of my money, but the financial deception went deeper. I found social media posts from their honeymoon and Bali trip that had supposedly been David's surprise gift to her. The resort they'd stayed at cost $400 per night. For a week. The excursions, the spa treatments, the elaborate dinners, it was easily a $5,000 honeymoon, funded by the money she'd skimmed from my wedding contribution. I felt sick. Not only had she taken my money under false pretenses, she'd used it to fund romantic memories with her husband while excluding me from the celebration it was supposed to pay for. I dove deeper into our financial history, tracking every loan, every borrowed amount, every expense I covered over the years. My spreadsheet grew longer and more damning. $300 for the birthday dinner she couldn't afford. $800 for the job interview wardrobe. $500 for her security deposit. $250 for the weekend getaway. $150 for emergency car repairs. $200 for her father's birthday gift when she was between paychecks. The total was staggering. Over 8 years, I'd given Sarah $23,400 in various forms of support. Money that was supposedly borrowed but never repaid. Gifts that were never reciprocated. Expenses I covered because she convinced me that's what friends did for each other. But the most painful discovery came when I calculated what that money could have meant for my own life. $23,400 would have been a down payment on a small house. It would have been a year's worth of emergency savings. It would have been the security and stability I'd sacrificed to fund Sarah's lifestyle upgrades. Instead, I was 32 years old, still renting, still freelancing without the safety net I could have built if I hadn't been so generous with someone who saw my kindness as weakness, printed everything out and organized it in a folder. Bank transfers, receipt copies, email confirmations, text message screenshots where Sarah had asked for money. The evidence painted a clear picture of financial manipulation, spanning nearly a decade. The wedding budget breakdown was particularly damning. I'd saved every email where Sarah had sent me vendor quotes and payment schedules. Now I could see how she'd systematically inflated each cost, turning my generous gift into her personal profit. What made it worse was remembering how grateful she'd seemed, how she cried when I'd offered the money, how she promised it would mean everything. To her, those tears had been real tears of relief that she'd found another way to fund not just her wedding, but her honeymoon too. I thought about all the times I'd eaten ramen for dinner to save money, all the client projects I'd taken on to build, up my savings, all the small sacrifices I'd made so I could be generous when my friends needed help. Sarah had seen those sacrifices and calculated exactly how much she could extract from my goodwill. The folder sat on my coffee table like evidence in a crime scene. Because that's what this was, really not theft in a legal sense, but a systematic exploitation of trust and affection. Sarah had turned my love into her profit margin. But as I stared at those numbers, I felt something unexpected. Clarity. For years, I'd excused Sarah's behavior, rationalized her selfishness, blamed myself for expecting too much from friendship. Now I had proof that my instincts had been right. This wasn't normal. This wasn't how friends treated each other. The financial forensics had revealed more than money mismanagement. They'd exposed the calculated nature of Sarah's manipulation. Every request had been precisely calibrated to my generosity. Every sob story designed to unlock my wallet. Every promise of repayment a lie meant to keep me compliant. I'd been funding my own exploitation, one transfer at a time. Armed with financial evidence and painful text message screenshots, I decided to confront our mutual friend group. If Sarah had been talking about me behind my back for months, surely someone else had heard her cruel comments and chosen to stay. Silent Dot, I started with Jessica, who'd been at the bridal shower and bachelorette party. When I called her, her voice immediately became guarded. Jill, hi. How are you doing after ... everything? What exactly do you mean by everything, Jessica? She sighed. Look, I know the wedding was awkward. Sarah was stressed, and sometimes people say things they don't mean. So you knew she was calling me embarrassing? She mentioned that she was worried about group dynamics, but I thought it was just pre-wedding anxiety. I felt my anger building. Group dynamics? Jessica, I paid for her entire wedding. $15,000. And she was worried about group dynamics? Wait, you paid for all of it? Jessica's surprise sounded genuine. She told us her parents helped significantly. Her parents didn't contribute a penny. It was all my money. I paused, letting that sink in, and you all just stood by while she talked about how embarrassing I was. Jill, we didn't know what to do. She's the bride, and you know how she gets when she's upset. How she gets when she's upset. The phrase revealed everything about how our friend group had learned to manage Sarah's moods, to placate her rather than challenge her cruelty. Next, I called Amanda, who'd been Sarah's college sorority sister and had introduced us years ago. Amanda at least had the decency to sound ashamed when I confronted her. I should have said something, she admitted. During the bachelorette party, when Sarah was going on about how you were too intense about the wedding planning. I knew it was wrong, especially if you were paying for everything. She said I was too intense about planning the wedding I was funding. She said you were acting like it was your wedding instead of hers, but knowing now that you paid for it. God, Jill, I'm so sorry. I found a group chat on Amanda's phone that she reluctantly showed me messages from the bachelorette weekend that made my stomach turn. Sarah, Jill keeps texting me about table linens. Like, can she not take a hint that I don't want her input on everything? Emma, maybe she's just excited to help? Sarah, she's excited to control everything. David thinks she has a weird obsession with me. Jessica, that's harsh, Sarah. Sarah, is it though? She literally has no life outside of my business. It's getting creepy. Reading those messages felt like being slapped. While I'd been carefully coordinating with vendors and managing timelines to make her day perfect, Sarah had been painting me as a stalker to our friends. The most devastating conversation came with Rachel, Sarah's work friend who'd witnessed years of our friendship from the outside. I always wondered why you put up with her, Rachel said bluntly. She used to complain about you constantly at work events, how you were always trying too hard to be part of her life. And none of you thought to mention this to me? Honestly? We figured you knew what you were getting into. Sarah's always been like this. She finds people who'll give her what she needs, then complains about them behind their backs. We thought you were okay with being her support system. Support system. Not friend support system. Like I was a service provider who should be grateful for the opportunity to fund Sarah's lifestyle. There was this one time, Rachel continued, when you covered her share of a group dinner because she'd forgotten her wallet again. After you left, Sarah laughed about how easy you were to manipulate. She said you were so desperate to be, like that you'd pay for anything. The words hit me like a physical blow. She said I was desperate to be liked. She said you had no real friends besides her, so you do whatever it took to keep her around. We all thought it was mean, but nobody wanted to get involved in your friendship drama. Friendship drama. They'd watched Sarah exploit me for years and dismissed it as drama, as if my financial and emotional well-being were entertainment rather than legitimate concerns. The final conversation was with Mark, David's best man and the only person who might have witnessed Sarah's behavior from the groom's side. David's mentioned that Sarah finds you a lot to handle, Mark said carefully. He's encouraged her to set better boundaries. Boundaries around what? Around your attachment to their relationship. He thinks you're too invested in Sarah's life. I laughed bitterly. Too invested? Mark, I planned their entire wedding. Sarah made me invested. Look, I don't know all the details, but David's told me that Sarah feels guilty about how much you do for her. Like she can't live up to your expectations of friendship. The victim blaming was breathtaking. Sarah felt guilty about how much I did for her, so the solution was to paint me as needy and excessive rather than simply treating me with basic respect and gratitude. By the end of these conversations, I understood the full scope of what had happened. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me, she orchestrated a character assassination that turned our entire friend group into accomplices. They'd all watched her exploit my generosity while convincing themselves that I was the problem for being too much, too intense, too invested. None of them had thought to protect me. None of them had challenged Sarah's narrative. They'd all chosen the easier path of managing my feelings rather than confronting her behavior. I realized I hadn't just lost Sarah. I discovered that an entire friend group had been complicit in my humiliation. turning my kindness into evidence of my desperation and my generosity into proof of my instability. Something fundamental shifted in me after those conversations. The hurt was still there, but it was being consumed by something fiercer, rage. Not the explosive, destructive kind, but the cold, calculating fury that comes from finally seeing. Clearly, for 8 years, I'd been the perfect victim, generous, trusting, willing to make excuses for behavior that should have been inexcusable. I'd absorbed Sarah's cruelty and our friend's complicity, telling myself that keeping the peace was more important than defending my dignity, but I was done being the victim. I spent the next 3 days researching my options. Could I pursue legal action for the money Sarah had taken under false pretenses? What about the deliberate misrepresentation of wedding costs? The systematic financial exploitation spanning years? I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. She reviewed my documentation with increasing interest. The wedding funds could potentially be considered a gift, which would be harder to recover, she explained. But if you can prove that she deliberately misrepresented the costs in order to pocket the difference, that's fraud. And if there's a pattern of obtaining money through false pretenses, we might have a stronger case. I had emails where Sarah had quoted inflated vendor costs. I had the real contracts showing actual prices. I had bank transfers tied to specific lies about what the money would cover. The challenge, the lawyer continued, is that proving intent can be difficult, and the legal fees might exceed what you could recover. However, you definitely have enough evidence to make her uncomfortable. But as I sat in that law office, I realized that legal action wasn't what I wanted. Court proceedings would drag on for months, cost thousands in attorney fees, and ultimately give Sarah more of my time and energy. She'd already taken 8 years of my life. I wasn't giving her more. I wanted something different. Accountability, truth, justice that restored my dignity rather than just my bank account. That evening, I started planning my approach. Sarah's power had always come from information asymmetry. She controlled the narrative, decided what people knew, managed her image carefully. But I had something she'd never expected, evidence. I began organizing everything methodically. Financial records showing the pattern of exploitation, screenshots of her cruel messages about me, testimonials from vendors who'd seen her behavior firsthand, a timeline of lies she'd told about our friendship. The key was precision. Sarah was skilled at emotional manipulation, at making herself the victim, at turning any confrontation into proof of other people's instability. I couldn't give her that opening. Everything I said would need to be factual, documented, unassailable. I also started researching Sarah's current situation. She'd been posting constantly about her honeymoon, her new apartment, her perfect married life. All funded, I now knew, by money she'd stolen from me. But more importantly, I could see how much her image meant to her, the carefully curated social media presence, the professional networking, the reputation she'd built in our social circle. That's when I understood what would hurt Sarah most. Not financial consequences, but social ones. She'd built her life on being seen as charming, generous, beloved. What would happen if people knew who she really was? I wasn't interested in revenge for revenge's sake, but I was very interested in making sure Sarah couldn't do to anyone else what she'd done to me. How many other generous friends had she exploited? How many other trusting people had funded her lifestyle while being dismissed as embarrassing and needy? The research revealed something else. Sarah wasn't as financially secure as she appeared. Her new apartment was expensive, her lifestyle had expanded significantly since the wedding, and David's job, while stable, wasn't enough to support the image they were projecting. They were living on credit and the money she'd taken from me. I started making notes about timing. When would a revelation about Sarah's character have the most impact? When would she be most vulnerable to social consequences? Her birthday was coming up in 6 weeks, a big party she'd been planning, inviting everyone from our extended friend group. She'd want it to be perfect, a celebration of her new married life and success. That's when I'd tell my story. Not out of spite, but out of necessity. People deserve to know who they were celebrating, what their friendship with Sarah might actually cost them. I felt calmer than I had in days. For the first time since overhearing her cruel words, I had a plan that felt worthy of who I was becoming, not the desperate, people-pleasing Jill who tolerated years of exploitation, but someone stronger. Someone who understood that kindness without boundaries wasn't kindness at all. It was enabling. Sarah had counted on my passivity, my willingness to absorb her cruelty in silence. She calculated that I'd disappear quietly after the wedding, probably blaming myself for expecting too much from our friendship. She calculated wrong. I decided to start gathering testimonials from the wedding vendors, the people who'd witnessed Sarah's behavior firsthand and knew the truth about who'd really been running the show. These weren't friends who could be manipulated or convinced to stay silent. They were professionals who dealt with Sarah as a client, and their observations would carry weight. My first call was to Marcus, the wedding photographer. I'd worked with him extensively during the planning process, and he'd seemed genuinely confused about why I wasn't in any of the formal photos. Jill, how did the photos turn out? I've been meaning to call you about the final album, he said when he answered. Actually, Marcus, that's part of why I'm calling. I need to ask you something sensitive about the wedding. I explained the situation, the overheard conversation, the financial deception, the pattern of exploitation. Marcus listened without interrupting. Jesus, Jill, I'm so sorry you went through that. He paused. You know, I have to be honest, I was confused about the whole arrangement from day one. You were clearly the point person for everything. But then Sarah would show up and act like she was making all the decisions. What do you mean? Well, you'd email me detailed schedules and photo lists, coordinate timing with other vendors, handle all the practical stuff. But during the actual shoots, Sarah would interrupt constantly, change things we'd already planned, and then get frustrated when the timeline fell behind. Marcus had worked hundreds of weddings, and Sarah's behavior had stood out to him as unusual. There was this moment during the getting ready photos, he continued, when Sarah was complaining about how stressed she was, how much work the wedding had been. And I'm thinking, work? This woman hasn't managed a single vendor or timeline. You did all the work. Did you notice anything else? The way she talked about you was weird. Like, when you weren't around, she'd make these comments about how you were so intense about the wedding details. But you were the only one who actually knew what was supposed to happen when. Marcus offered to write a statement about what he'd observed. Sarah's lack of involvement in planning contrasted with her demands during execution. Her dismissive comments about me, the confusion about who was actually in charge. Next, I called Elena, the florist. The conversation was even more revealing. I wondered when someone would ask me about this, Elena said after I'd explained the situation. That whole wedding made me uncomfortable. Why? Sarah's attitude toward you was horrible, and she wasn't subtle about it. During our final consultation, when you stepped away to take a call, she made this comment about how you were obsessed with her wedding and couldn't take a hint that your input wasn't wanted. I felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but Elena wasn't finished. The thing is, your input was the only reason that wedding worked. Sarah's initial vision was completely unrealistic for her budget, or what I thought was her budget. She wanted $800 worth of exotic flowers for a $400 arrangement. When I explained that wasn't possible, she got snippy and said you'd handled the budget concerns. She made me the bad guy for budget constraints I was actually solving with my own. Money? Exactly. And then, during setup, she kept changing her mind about arrangements we'd finalized weeks earlier. The centerpieces, the altar flowers, even the bridal bouquet. She wanted everything different at the last minute. I kept trying to explain that we couldn't make major changes on the wedding day. And she said, well, Jill will pay for whatever needs to be fixed. Elena had been in the wedding industry for 15 years and had never encountered a situation quite like ours. Most brides are stressed, but they're grateful for help. Sarah seemed annoyed by your involvement, even though you were solving all her problems. It was like she wanted the perfect wedding, but resented having to acknowledge how she was getting it. The caterer, David Chun, had a similar story. When I called him, his first words were, I was wondering if you were okay after that wedding. You noticed something was wrong. Jill, in 20 years of catering, I've never seen a bride treat their main support person the way Sarah treated you. You handled all our communications, managed the timeline, even helped serve when we were short-staffed during cocktail hour. But Sarah acted like you were some kind of intrusion on her special day. David had kept notes about the event, something he did for particularly difficult clients, and he offered to share his observations. During dinner service, Sarah complained to her new husband that you were hovering too much, even though you were literally helping my staff distribute meals. She seemed embarrassed by your presence, which was bizarre since you were the reason she could afford the premium menu in the first place. The venue coordinator, Patricia, was the most direct. When I explained what had happened, she didn't hesitate to offer her perspective. That woman was awful, Patricia said bluntly. You coordinated everything beautifully, handled every crisis, made our job so much easier. But Sarah treated you like hired help she was embarrassed to acknowledge. Patricia had managed events at the venue for over a decade and had strong opinions about client behavior. Good clients treat their support people with respect, whether they're family, friends, or vendors. Sarah was dismissive to you, demanding with us, and completely unrealistic about timeline and logistics. Without your advance work, that wedding would have been a disaster. She offered to provide a written statement detailing the contrast between my professional coordination and Sarah's disruptive behavior. But the most damning testimony came from James, the DJ who'd worked with me extensively on playlist and timeline coordination. I saved the voicemails. He told me, Sarah left me 3 angry messages the week before the wedding, complaining that the music selections were too much Jill's taste and not enough hers. But she never responded to my emails asking for her input. She complained about my music choices. She said you were taking over her wedding with your song preferences. But Jill, you were the only one who gave me any direction at all. Sarah never sent me a single song request or timeline note. Everything came through you. James offered to share those voicemails. Evidence of Sarah's complaints about my involvement in a wedding I was both funding and planning as I compiled these vendor testimonials. A clear picture emerged. I hadn't been an overeager friend inserting myself into Sarah's wedding. I'd been the primary coordinator keeping everything organized while Sarah focused on being celebrated. But instead of gratitude, she'd felt embarrassed by the very competence that made her perfect day possible. The vendors had seen through her. Immediately, they understood exactly who was doing the work, who was solving the problems, and who was making unreasonable demands. Their professional perspectives would be much harder for Sarah to dismiss than the observations of mutual friends, who might be seen as taking sides. I had documentation from neutral parties who'd witnessed her behavior and my contributions. Evidence that couldn't be explained away by wedding stress or misunderstood dynamics. Truth from people whose only agenda was delivering good service to their actual client, which, in every practical sense, had been me. With vendor testimonials secured, I turned to documenting the digital trail of our friendship. 8 years of text messages, emails, and social media interactions had created an archive of Sarah's behavior that would be impossible to deny. Or our EFREM I started with our text message history, going back to 2016 when we'd first exchanged numbers. The pattern was immediately obvious. Pages and pages of Sarah asking for favors, borrowing money, or needing help, punctuated by brief periods of normal conversation. When she didn't need anything, the financial requests were particularly damning. When read in sequence, Jill, I'm so embarrassed to ask, but could you spot me for groceries this week? I'll pay you back Friday when I get paid. My landlord is being a total dick about late fees. Could you cover the extra $50? I promise I'll get it back to you. I know I still owe you from last month, but my car payment bounced and I'll get hit with overdraft fees. Could you transfer $200? I'll pay everything back at once next week. The promises to pay me back had been consistent. The actual repayment had been non-existent, but more revealing were the messages where Sarah made demands disguised as requests. I need you to come with me to look at wedding dresses tomorrow. I know you're busy with work, but this is important. Can you pick up my dry cleaning? I'm running late for dinner with David's parents. I need you to call the caterer about the timeline. They listen to you better than me. Reading through years of these messages, I could see how Sarah had trained me to drop everything for her needs while treating my own time. And priorities is less important. The email chain was even more revealing. I'd saved every exchange about the wedding planning, and together they showed the massive scope of work I'd taken on. The new coordination emails where I'd handled negotiations, contract reviews, and payment arrangements. Vendor management emails where I'd researched options, scheduled meetings, and coordinated timelines. Budget tracking emails where I'd itemized expenses and managed payments, but interspersed with these business communications or personal emails. That showed Sarah's real attitude toward my involvement. Jill, I appreciate all your help, but you're getting a little too controlling about my wedding. Please remember that these are my choices to make. I need you to stop CCing me on vendor emails unless there's a real problem. I trust you to handle the details. David thinks you're more invested in this wedding than I am, which is making people uncomfortable. The contradiction was stark. Sarah wanted me to handle all of the work but resented any evidence that I was doing so. Thought social media provided another layer of evidence. I screenshot every post Sarah had made about our friendship over the years, and the pattern was telling. When she needed something during job searches, breakups, or financial stress, the posts were effusive about our sisterhood and her gratitude for my support. But during good times, when Sarah's life was going well, I virtually disappeared from her social media. No tagged photos, no birthday post, no acknowledgement of my role in her successes. The most damning evidence came from Facebook messages Sarah had sent to mutual friends' conversations. I'd been able to access through friends who'd screenshot and saved particularly cruel exchanges. In a message to Emma from 2 years ago. Jill is getting so clingy lately. She acts like we're joined at the hip or something. I need some space, but don't know how to tell her without hurting her feelings. To Amanda last year, I feel bad because Jill tries so hard, but sometimes her desperation for approval is exhausting. Like, I can't be responsible for her entire social life. To Jessica during wedding planning, Jill is acting like this wedding is a group project instead of my day. I'm starting to think David is right that I need to set better boundaries. Each message revealed Sarah's strategy. Paint me as needy and excessive while positioning herself as the generous friend tolerating my demands. She'd been building a narrative about our friendship that justified her cruel treatment while making herself the victim. But the most valuable piece of digital evidence was one I'd almost forgotten. A voice message Sarah had left me during a particularly difficult period in her life 2 years earlier. She'd been drunk, emotional, and brutally honest about how she saw our relationship. Jill, I know I don't say this enough, but you're the only person who's always there for me. Like, everyone else has conditions, you know? They'll help me if it's convenient or if they get something out of it. But you just give. You never ask for anything back. Sometimes I think you're too good for me, and I don't deserve a friend like you. I know I take advantage sometimes, and I feel terrible about it. But I also know you'll forgive me because that's who you are. God, I'm such a terrible person. But I need you, Jill. I need someone who loves me unconditionally because I'm not. Sure, anyone else could. I'd save that message because it had felt like the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Sarah had acknowledged her exploitation and my unconditional love in the same breath, recognizing both my value and her willingness to abuse it. Now, listening to it again, I could hear what I'd missed the first time. It wasn't remorse. It was calculation. Sarah hadn't been apologizing for taking advantage of me. She'd been explaining why she'd continue to do it. She'd identified my unconditional love as both my greatest strength and my greatest vulnerability, and she'd made a conscious choice to exploit it. I organized all the digital evidence into categories: financial requests and promises to repay, wedding planning correspondence showing my role versus her claims, social media posts revealing the conditional nature of her appreciation, private messages to friends painting me as desperate and clingy, the voice message proving she'd consciously chosen to exploit my loyalty. Together, these digital breadcrumbs told the complete story of our friendship from Sarah's perspective. I was a resource to be managed, not a person to be valued. My generosity was weakness to be exploited, not kindness to be treasured. My loyalty was a tool for her benefit, not a bond between equals. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Sarah couldn't claim these were misunderstandings, or that I was misremembering conversations. The words were her own, preserved in digital amber, revealing the calculated nature of her manipulation. But more than that, the digital archive showed me something crucial about myself. I'd been complicit in my own exploitation. I responded to every request, absorbed every slight, and enabled every boundary violation. Reading through years of my own responses, I could see how I'd trained Sarah to treat me badly by accepting unacceptable behavior. The woman who'd written those accommodating messages, who'd apologized for having needs and thanked Sarah for taking. My money felt like a stranger to me now. She'd been so desperate to maintain a friendship that she'd sacrificed her dignity piece by piece, never recognizing that what she was fighting to preserve had never been real. I printed out the most significant exchanges and organized them chronologically. The progression was stark, from genuine friendship in the early years to pure exploitation by the end. Sarah had slowly escalated her demands while simultaneously undermining my worth, turning me to accept less while giving more. The digital evidence would be impossible for Sarah to explain away or reframe. These were her words, her choices, her character revealed through years of unguarded communications. When the time came to tell my story, I'd have proof that this wasn't about misunderstandings or wedding stress or different expectations of friendship. This was about a deliberate pattern of exploitation that had lasted 8 years and cost me over $20,000. And now I had the documentation to prove it. 3 weeks after the wedding, Marcus the photographer called with news that would prove to be the final piece of evidence I needed. "Jill, I've finished editing the wedding footage, and there's something you need to see before I deliver the final product to Sarah." "What do you mean?" The videographer captured Sarah's reception speech, and, well, you should watch it yourself. Can you come by my studio today? I drove over that afternoon, my stomach churning with anticipation. Marcus had set up a viewing area with a large monitor, and his expression was grim as he queued up the footage. "This is from about 20 minutes into the reception, right after dinner service," he explained. Sarah insisted on giving a thank you speech. The video began with Sarah standing at the head table, radiant in her wedding dress, holding a microphone with David beside her. She looked every inch the perfect bride, beaming at her gathered guests. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate with David and me," she began, her voice warm and emotional. "This day has been absolutely perfect, and it wouldn't have been possible without so many amazing people." I watched as she thanked her parents for their emotional support, her bridesmaids for being absolutely gorgeous, and David's family for welcoming her with open arms. "I also want to thank our incredible vendors," Sarah continued. "Marcus, our photographer, captured every beautiful moment. Elena created the most stunning floral arrangements. David Chun and his team provided an absolutely delicious meal. Patricia made sure everything ran smoothly at this gorgeous venue." She went on to thank the DJ, the officiant, even the hair and makeup team. Person after person who had contributed to her special day received public acknowledgement and gratitude. But as the speech continued, and Sarah thanked what seemed like every single person who had touched her wedding in any way, one name was conspicuously absent: mine. The woman who had funded the entire celebration, who had planned every detail, who had coordinated with every vendor Sarah was now thanking. I didn't exist in her narrative of gratitude. "Most of all," Sarah said, her voice breaking with emotion, "I want to thank my husband David for loving me exactly as I am, and for showing me what true partnership looks like." The crowd applauded as she sat down, and David stood to give his own brief speech, but the damage was done. In 5 minutes of public gratitude, Sarah had managed to thank everyone except the person who had made it all possible. "There's more," Marcus said quietly, fast-forwarding the footage. This is from about an hour later. The new scene showed Sarah talking animatedly with a group of guests near the bar. The videographer had been capturing candid reception moments, and the audio was clear. People keep asking me how we managed to plan such a beautiful wedding on A budget, Sarah was saying, laughing. The secret is having really generous friends and family who believe in love. A guest responded, "Well, you certainly have good taste." Everything looks so expensive and elegant. David and I are just so grateful for everyone's support, Sarah replied. We feel so blessed to have people in our lives who wanted to contribute to our happiness. I felt sick watching her take credit for the generous friends and family, while simultaneously erasing my existence from the story. She was actively claiming my contribution as evidence of widespread community support while ensuring I received no recognition for it. But the most devastating moment came in the final piece of footage Marcus showed me. It was from late in the reception, when most guests had gone home and only close family and the wedding party remained. Sarah was sitting at a table with her bridesmaids, looking tired but happy. Someone had asked about the wedding planning process, and Sarah launched into a story that made my blood boil. "Oh my God, planning this wedding was so stressful," she said, gesturing dramatically. I'm not naturally organized like some people, so I was just winging it most of the time. Thank goodness David's mom helped with some of the vendor coordination, and my bridesmaids were amazing with all the little details. David's mom had attended exactly 2 vendor meetings. The bridesmaids had contributed a group gift and shown up for their dress fittings. But Sarah was crediting them with work I had done, rewriting the history of her own wedding planning while the cameras rolled. The hardest part was managing everyone's opinions, Sarah continued. You know how it is, everyone thinks they know what's best for your wedding. I had to learn to set boundaries and trust my own instincts. The irony was staggering. The woman who had relied on me to make every significant decision about her wedding was now portraying herself as having to resist outside interference. Marcus stopped the video and looked at me with genuine sympathy. Jill, I've shot over 300 weddings, and I've never seen anything like this. She literally thanked everyone except the person who made it all possible. I sat in stunned silence, processing what I'd just witnessed. It wasn't just that Sarah had failed to thank me. It was that she'd actively constructed a narrative that erased my contributions while claiming credit for generosity she'd actually received. Are you planning to include this speech in the final wedding video? I asked. Marcus hesitated. That's actually why I called you. Professionally. I deliver what the client requests. But ethically, this feels wrong. Sarah commissioned a video that completely misrepresents the reality of her wedding planning. I thought about it for a moment. Include everything. Sarah ordered a complete record of her wedding day. And this is part of that record. She had to live with what she actually said. Marcus nodded. I'll also make sure you get a copy of this footage. You might need it someday. Driving home, I felt a strange mixture of devastation and validation. The wedding video was perhaps the most damning evidence of Sarah's character, not just what she'd said, but what she'd deliberately chosen not to say. In her moment of public gratitude, surrounded by everyone who mattered to her, she'd made a conscious choice to erase me from her story. But she'd also created permanent documentation of that choice. Every time she watched her wedding video, she'd have to see her own character reflected back at her. And if I ever needed proof of how little our friendship had meant to her, I'd have it in her own words, preserved forever in high definition. The wedding video wasn't just a record of Sarah's special day. It was a confession of her true nature, captured for posterity, as word began to spread quietly through the vendor community about what had happened at Sarah's wedding. I discovered I had allies in places I'd never expected. The wedding industry, it turned out, was a close-knit community where vendors talked to each other about difficult clients and exceptional circumstances. Elena, the florist, was the first to reach out with additional support. Jill, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I want you to know that several of us vendors have been discussing Sarah's behavior. It's not just unprofessional, it's cruel. We see a lot of family drama in this business, but what happened to you was different. Elena explained that she'd spoken with other florists who'd dealt with similar situations clients, who'd taken credit for arrangements paid for by family members, or who treated their financial supporters poorly. There's an informal network of us who share information about problematic clients, she continued. Not to gossip, but to protect each other and future clients. Sarah's behavior is exactly the kind of thing we document. She offered to write a detailed statement not just about Sarah's treatment of me, but about her general attitude toward vendors and her unrealistic expectations throughout the planning process. She demanded premium services at budget prices, complained constantly about costs she wasn't paying, and treated everyone like hired help instead of professionals. That's a pattern we see with clients who aren't spending their own money. David Chun, the caterer, called that same week with similar sentiments. I've been in this business for 20 years, and I've never forgotten a client who behaved the way Sarah did. The disrespect toward you was shocking, but her attitude toward my staff was almost as bad. He'd kept detailed notes from the event, something he did only when clients were particularly difficult. During cocktail hour, she complained that the appetizers weren't elegant enough, even though she'd specifically requested budget-friendly options. During dinner, she criticized the presentation while guests were actively complimenting the food. She had no appreciation for the work that went into making her vision reality. David offered to share his event notes, which detailed not just Sarah's complaints, but her dismissive treatment of anyone she considered staff, including me. Despite my obvious role as the primary coordinator, the most unexpected ally came from Patricia, the venue coordinator, who called with information that would prove crucial to my case. Jill, I've been reviewing our contract files, and there's something you should know. Legally speaking, you were our primary client for this event. I was confused. What do you mean? The initial contract was signed by Sarah, but every subsequent contract modification, payment, and communication came through you. From a legal standpoint, you became the contracting party when you took over financial responsibility. Patricia explained that venues often dealt with complex family financial arrangements, but the pattern of communication and payment usually established who the real client was. If there were any issues with the event damage, disputes, vendor problems, we would have contacted you, not Sarah, because you were our primary point of contact and financial guarantor. This meant I had legal standing I hadn't realized existed. The wedding hadn't just been funded by me. It had effectively been contracted by me. James, the DJ, reached out with perhaps the most valuable support of all. He'd been recording audio throughout the reception for his own equipment monitoring, and he captured conversations I'd never heard. I don't usually save this stuff, but something about that wedding bothered me, he explained. I've been doing events for 15 years, and I've never seen a bride treat their main supporter the way Sarah treated you. The audio files he shared were devastating. Conversations between Sarah and her bridesmaids, where she complained about my hovering while I was literally helping serve dinner. Comments to David's family about how she'd finally be free from people who were too invested in her life. Dismissive remarks about my appearance, my social skills, my desperate need for attention. I saved these because I had a feeling someone might need evidence someday, James said. Sarah's behavior was so consistently cruel that it felt deliberate, not just wedding stress. The most powerful testimonial came from Marcus, who not only witnessed the entire event, but had professional insight into wedding dynamics. I want to write a formal statement about what I observed, he told me. Not just about Sarah's treatment of you, but about the broader pattern of behavior I documented. Marcus had shot weddings for celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. He understood complex family dynamics and financial arrangements. His professional assessment would carry significant weight. In 15 years of wedding photography, I've never seen a client take such complete credit for an event they'd had so little hand in planning or funding. Sarah's behavior wasn't just ungrateful, it was dishonest. As I collected these professional testimonials, I realized I gained something unexpected: respect. These vendors, who dealt with demanding clients and difficult situations regularly, had recognized something exceptional in Sarah's cruelty. They'd seen behavior so far outside the bounds of normal wedding stress that they'd documented it independently. More importantly, they'd recognized my dignity in a situation where Sarah had tried to strip it away. They'd seen past her narrative about my desperation and intensity to recognize competence, kindness, and grace under pressure. Elena summed it up best when she handed me her written statement. Jill, in our business, we see people at their most stressed and vulnerable. We learned to recognize character quickly. Sarah showed us who she really was, but so did you. Her behavior was shameful, but yours was exemplary. I'd gone into this process thinking I was alone, abandoned by friends who'd chosen Sarah's comfort over my dignity. But I discovered a community of professionals who'd witnessed the truth and were willing to stand by it. They couldn't give me back my friendship or my money, but they could give me something almost as valuable, validation that what I'd experienced was real, unacceptable, and not my fault. When the time came to tell my story, I wouldn't just have evidence, I'd have character witnesses. With my evidence compiled and vendor testimonials secured, I scheduled a follow-up consultation with the attorney to explore my legal options more thoroughly. Attorney Jennifer Walsh specialized in fraud and breach of fiduciary duty cases, and she'd agreed to review my complete documentation. This is significantly stronger than what you brought me initially. She said, reviewing the organized files I prepared, the vendor contracts establishing you as the primary client, the documented pattern of financial misrepresentation, and the testimony from neutral parties, this built a compelling case. She explained that my situation fell into several potential legal categories: fraudulent misrepresentation regarding wedding cost, breach of fiduciary duty given the trust relationship, and potentially even theft by deception for the money Sarah had pocketed. The wedding fund misrepresentation is particularly strong, Jennifer continued. You have clear evidence that she inflated costs to pocket the difference, and that constitutes fraud regardless of the underlying relationship. The damages were substantial when calculated properly, beyond the $3,600 Sarah had stolen through. Inflated wedding costs, there was the $15,000 principal that had been obtained through misrepresentation, plus interest and potential punitive damages. Conservatively, you're looking at a $25,000 judgment if we can prove our case, Jennifer explained. More if we include emotional distress damages and attorney fees. But she was careful to explain the challenges. Sarah could claim the money was a gift between friends, which would complicate the fraud charges. She could also argue that any misrepresentations were mistakes rather than intentional deception. I shared the voice message where Sarah had admitted to taking advantage of me, the text messages showing her pattern of manipulation, and the vendor testimonials proving she deliberately misled me about costs. This changes everything, Jennifer said after reviewing the new evidence. The voice message is particularly damning. It shows consciousness of wrongdoing and intent to continue the exploitation. A jury would find that very persuasive. She outlined the litigation process: filing a civil complaint, serving Sarah with papers, discovery phase where we'd demand her financial records, depositions where she'd have to answer questions under oath, and potentially a trial if she didn't settle. The discovery phase would be particularly valuable, Jennifer explained. We could subpoena her bank recs, credit card statements, social media accounts, and communications with third parties. If there's a pattern of this behavior with other people, we'd find it. The timeline would be extensive: 12 to 18 months from filing to resolution, potentially longer if Sarah fought aggressively. The costs would be significant too, with attorney fees likely reaching $15,000 to $20,000 even if we won. There's also the emotional cost, Jennifer warned. Litigation is stressful, time-consuming, and often nasty. Sarah's attorneys would likely attack your character, argue that you were a willing participant in an unbalanced friendship, and try to paint you as vindictive. But she was optimistic about our chances. The evidence is strong, the damages are clear, and the facts are compelling. Most defendants in Sarah's position would settle rather than face a trial where all of this becomes public record. As I sat in Jennifer's office, considering my options, I felt the weight of the decision. Legal action would give me the best chance of financial recovery and formal vindication. A court judgment would establish officially that Sarah had wronged me, that my perceptions had been accurate, and that her behavior had been legally actionable, but it would also mean months or years of my life consumed by conflict with someone who'd already taken too much from me. It would mean reliving the humiliation through depositions and court proceedings. It would mean giving Sarah even more of my time and emotional energy. Can I ask you something as a person, not just as an attorney? I said to Jennifer. Of course. In your experience, do people like Sarah actually learn from legal consequences? Would this change her behavior, or would it just make her more careful about covering her tracks? Jennifer considered the question carefully. In my experience, people like Sarah who show this level of calculated manipulation don't usually change their fundamental character because of legal consequences. They might become more cautious, but the underlying personality traits that drive this behavior tend to be pretty entrenched. So this would be about justice for me, not rehabilitation. For her? Exactly. The question you need to ask yourself is whether formal legal vindication is worth the cost financial, emotional, and temporal of pursuing it. I thanked Jennifer and told her I needed time to think. Driving home, I reflected on what I really wanted from this situation. Financial recovery would be nice, but I wasn't destitute without it. Legal vindication would feel good. But I already had plenty of evidence that I'd been wronged. What I really wanted was for Sarah to face consequences that would prevent her from doing this to someone else. I wanted our mutual friends to understand what had really happened. I wanted the truth to matter more than Sarah's carefully constructed image. Legal action might accomplish those goals, but it would take years and cost a fortune. There had to be a more efficient path to accountability, one that would expose Sarah's character without consuming the rest of my life. That's when I started thinking seriously about the court of public opinion instead of a court of law. Sarah's power came from her reputation, her social connections, and her ability to control narratives about her relationships. What if I simply told the truth and let her own community judge her behavior? The legal system could give me money and formal vindication, but social consequences could give me something more valuable. The assurance that Sarah would think twice before exploiting the next generous friend who crossed her path. I kept Jennifer's assessment and my legal options open, but I started planning a different kind of justice, one that would be swifter, cheaper, and potentially more effective at protecting future victims of Sarah's charm. I decided to give Sarah one chance to make things right before taking any public action. Not because she deserved it, but because the woman I was becoming stronger, more confident, more principled, believed in offering redemption before pursuing consequences. I texted her requesting a private conversation. Sarah, I need to talk with you about something important. Can we meet for coffee this week? Her response came 3 hours later. Of course. I've been meaning to catch up. How about Thursday at 2 p.m. at Cornerstone Cafe? The casual tone of her message, as if we were planning a normal friend catch-up, told me everything I needed to know about her awareness of what she'd done. She genuinely believed she could continue our friendship as if nothing had happened. Thursday arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I walked into the cafe. Sarah was already there, looking radiant in her post-wedding glow, scrolling through what appeared to be honeymoon photos on her phone. Jill, she exclaimed, standing to hug me. You look great. I'm so glad you reached out. David and I have been meaning to have you over for dinner to show you all our wedding photos. I sat down across from her, my phone recording app already activated in my pocket. I'd learned from Jennifer that documented conversations could be valuable, and I wanted a record of whatever Sarah said next. Actually, Sarah, that's not why I asked to meet. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, is everything okay? I overheard your conversation with the bridesmaids before the wedding. About how I was too embarrassing to be in the wedding party. The color drained from Sarah's face, but she recovered quickly. Jill, I think there might have been a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. I heard you clearly. You said I was awkward and embarrassing, and that you couldn't let me be in the wedding party despite the fact that I paid for everything. Sarah's expression shifted to the wounded look I'd seen countless times when she was caught in poor behavior. Jill, I was under so much stress that day. Brides say things they don't mean. Surely you understand. I understand perfectly. I also understand that you deliberately inflated the wedding costs and pocketed $3,600 of my money. Now Sarah looked genuinely shocked. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my folder of documentation and placed vendor invoices on the table between us. Venue, $4,200, not $5,000. Catering, $3,800, not $4,500. Photography, $2,100, not $2,800. Should I continue? Sarah stared at the papers, her mouth opening and closing silently. The real wedding cost was $11,400, Sarah. You took my $15,000 and kept the difference for your honeymoon. That's fraud. Jill, you're being crazy. Those are estimates. Costs change. These are final invoices. I called every vendor personally. I placed the bank transfer receipt on top of the pile. You stole from me, Sarah. From someone who loved you and wanted to help you. Sarah's defensive mask finally slipped, revealing something uglier underneath. Stole? Jill, you gave me that money. Nobody forced you to be so generous. I gave you money based on lies about what it would cost. You gave me money because you wanted to feel important. Because you have no life of your own, and living through mine made you feel special. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking, but I'd expected it. Sarah's go-to defense had always been to attack my character when her own was questioned. Is that really what you think our 8-year friendship was about? Our friendship? Sarah laughed bitterly. Jill, we weren't friends. You were a fan? You followed me around, paid for things, solved my problems, and made yourself indispensable because you knew that was the only way someone like me would keep someone like you around. The words were designed to wound, but instead they clarified everything. This was who Sarah really was when her mask came off, not the grateful, loving friend, but someone who saw relationships as transactions and people as resources. Someone like me? I asked calmly. You know what I mean? You single quotes read ... nice, reliable. Boring, you don't have the kind of life people want to be part of. So you bought your way into mine. I felt remarkably calm as Sarah revealed her true thoughts. About me. The hurt was there, but it was overwhelmed by a clear-eyed understanding of exactly who I'd been dealing with all these years. So when you cried about needing wedding money, when you promised I'd be honored at your wedding, when you said I was like a sister to you, that was all manipulation? Sarah's expression hardened. I told you what you wanted to hear. You wanted to be needed, so I let you be needed. You wanted to feel important, so I let you feel important. But that doesn't mean I owed you anything. You owed me honesty. You owed me respect. You owed me the basic decency of not stealing from me. I didn't steal anything. You gave me that money freely, and what I did with it was my business. The conversation was going exactly as I'd expected. Sarah felt no remorse, accepted no responsibility, and saw no problem with her behavior. She revealed her complete lack of empathy or conscience, and I was recording every word. Do you understand that what you did was wrong? I asked. What I did was accept help from someone who offered it. If you had expectations beyond that, that's your problem, not mine. And the cruel things you said about me to your bridesmaids? Sarah shrugged. I was venting to friends about feeling overwhelmed. If you hadn't been eavesdropping, your feelings wouldn't have been hurt. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no recognition that her words and actions had been deliberately hurtful. Sarah saw herself as the victim in this scenario, inconvenienced by my unreasonable expectations of basic friendship. I stood up and gathered my papers. Thank you for making this so clear, Sarah. Where are you going? Jill, you're being dramatic about this. Can't we just move past it? Move past it? I looked at her with genuine amazement. Sarah, you just told me that our 8-year friendship was fake, that you manipulated me for money, and that you have no remorse for lying and stealing. What exactly will we be moving past that to? I'm trying to be honest with you. Isn't that what you wanted? Honest? Sarah, everything you've said today proves that you've never been honest with me about anything. I turned to leave, but she grabbed my arm. Jill, wait. Look, maybe I said some things I didn't mean. I was feeling defensive. Can't we work this out like adults? I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. Adults don't steal from their friends, Sarah. Adults don't humiliate people who love them. Adults take responsibility for their actions. Fine. Her voice turned cold. Again, but if you're thinking about causing trouble for me, remember that nobody will believe your version over mine. I have David, I have the bridesmaids, I have everyone who matters. You're just the pathetic friend who couldn't take a hint. I smiled. For the first time since sitting down. We'll see about that. As I walked away, I heard Sarah calling after me, her voice shifting between threats and pleading. But I didn't look back. The intervention was over, and Sarah had shown me exactly who she was when given the opportunity to make things right. Now it was time to show everyone else. Sarah's birthday party was scheduled for the following Saturday, a celebration she'd been planning for weeks, inviting everyone from our extended social circle. She'd chosen an upscale restaurant, hired a photographer, and been posting countdown messages on social media about her dirty 30 celebration. It was the perfect opportunity to tell my story to the people who needed to hear it. I spent the week crafting my approach carefully. This wasn't about revenge or drama, it was about truth and protection. Our mutual friends deserved to know who they were celebrating, and future potential victims deserved to be warned. I started by creating a detailed post for Facebook, one that laid out the facts calmly and completely. I included key pieces of evidence, screenshots of Sarah's inflated cost estimates versus actual vendor invoices, excerpts from her cruel text messages, and quotes from the vendor testimonials. I wrote in a measured tone, focusing on facts rather than emotions. I need to share something difficult about a friendship that recently ended, the post began. Not for sympathy or drama, but because I believe people deserve to know the truth about someone they're considering trusting. I detailed the wedding funding, the discovery of cost inflation, the overheard conversation, and Sarah's complete lack of remorse when confronted. I included enough evidence to prove my claims without overwhelming readers with documentation. The post concluded, I'm sharing this not to hurt Sarah, but to protect others. If someone can systematically exploit a friendship of 8 years, they can and will do it again. Please be careful with your trust and your generosity. But I didn't post it yet. Instead, I began reaching out to specific people individually. Those who'd been planning to attend Sarah's birthday party. Emma was my first call. I need to tell you about my conversation with Sarah yesterday, I began and walked her through the entire confrontation. She really said your friendship was fake? Emma sounded genuinely horrified. She said I was boring and desperate, that I bought my way into her life, and that she only told me what I wanted to hear to keep the money flowing. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Jill, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken up when I heard her talking about you. I knew it was wrong. I'm not asking for apologies, Emma. I'm asking for people to understand who Sarah really is before anyone else gets hurt. By Thursday, I'd spoken individually with 8 people who'd been planning to attend Sarah's party. Each conversation followed a similar pattern: shock at the wedding cost deception, horror at Sarah's cruel words, and growing awareness of patterns they'd previously ignored. Rebecca was particularly shaken. She borrowed $200 from me last month for emergency car repairs. Now I'm wondering if that was even true. Amanda admitted that Sarah had been dropping hints about needing help with honeymoon expenses. She kept saying how expensive everything was getting and asking if I knew anyone who might want to contribute to a newlywed fund. I thought it was tacky, but now I wonder if she was testing the waters. Friday evening, I received a panicked text from Sarah. People are asking weird questions about our friendship and the wedding. What did you tell them? I responded simply, I told them the truth. My phone immediately rang. Sarah calling frantically. I didn't answer. She called 4 more times, then started texting. Jill, whatever you think you're doing, stop it right now. You're being vindictive and pathetic. Nobody cares about your little conspiracy theories. If you ruin my birthday party, I'll make sure everyone knows how unstable and obsessed you are. David's family will be there. You're going to embarrass yourself and prove everything I said about you. I screenshot the messages and added them to my evidence file. Sarah's panic was revealing. She understood exactly how damaging the truth would be to her carefully constructed image. Saturday arrived, and I made my final decision about how to handle Sarah's party. I could attend and confront her publicly, creating maximum drama. I could post my evidence online during the party, ensuring it overshadowed her celebration. Or I could let the truth speak for itself through the people who already knew it. I chose the third option. Instead of attending or posting during the party, I published my Facebook post at 10 p.m. after the celebration would be winding down. When people would be heading home and checking their phones, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments began appearing within minutes. "Holy shit, Jill, I had no idea. I'm so sorry this happened to you." Sarah always seemed too good to be true. Now I know why. I just realized she's never reciprocated any of the help I've given her over the years. The audacity of stealing money and then calling you embarrassing is breathtaking. But the most important responses came from people I hadn't expected, others who'd had concerning experiences with Sarah but had kept quiet about them. Maya, our old college friend, commented, "Jill, thank you for sharing this. Sarah did something similar to me sophomore year. I've been waiting for someone else to speak up." Lisa, Sarah's former coworker, added, "This explains so much about how she talked about her friends at work. I always thought it was weird how dismissive. She was about people who helped her." Within hours, my post had been shared dozens of times and generated over 200 comments. People were sharing their own stories of Sarah's manipulative behavior, creating a comprehensive picture of someone who'd been exploiting generosity for years. Most importantly, several people commented about canceling plans to lend Sarah money or help with various projects. My goal of protecting future victims was already succeeding. Sunday morning, I received a call from Amanda with updates from the party. "It was a disaster," she said bluntly. "About half the invited guests didn't show up. Those who did kept asking Sarah uncomfortable questions about the wedding costs and your friendship. She spent most of the night crying in the bathroom. How did she explain everything? She tried to claim you were having a mental breakdown and making things up. But too many people had already seen the evidence you shared." David looked mortified, especially when his family started asking questions. The social consequences were swift and decisive. Sarah's carefully maintained image as a charming, beloved friend had crumbled under the weight of documented truth. People who'd been planning to trust her with money, time, or emotional investment were suddenly reevaluating their relationships with her. But the most satisfying outcome wasn't Sarah's humiliation, it was the protection my honesty had provided to others. 3 different people messaged me privately to say they'd been considering lending Sarah money and had decided against it after learning the truth. "You probably saved me from making the same mistake you did," one wrote. "Thank you for being brave enough to speak up." Community justice had proven more effective than legal action could have been. Sarah would face the consequences of her choices every day, in every social interaction, for years to come. And unlike a court judgment that could be forgotten or explained away, her reputation would follow her through every future friendship and relationship. The truth had set me free, but it had also set everyone else free to make informed decisions about who deserved their trust and generosity. The week following my Facebook post brought a steady stream of consequences for Sarah, each one confirming that community accountability could be more powerful than any legal judgment. Monday morning, I received a forwarded email from Emma, a message Sarah had sent to several mutual friends titled "Setting the Record Straight." "I'm devastated by the malicious lies being spread about me," Sarah had written. "Jill has been struggling with mental health issues for months, and her obsession with my wedding became unhealthy. The financial details she's sharing are distorted versions of normal friend favors that she's now reframing as exploitation. I'm heartbroken that someone I cared about would try to destroy my reputation out of jealousy and instability." The email continued for 3 paragraphs, painting me as delusional and vindictive while positioning herself as the victim of my alleged breakdown. She'd included selective screenshots of our old conversations, carefully edited to remove context that would support my version of events, but Sarah had miscalculated. The people receiving this email had already seen my evidence, heard vendor testimonials, and witnessed her panic at the birthday party. Her attempt to rewrite history only reinforced their growing understanding of her manipulative nature. Rebecca forwarded me her response to Sarah's email. "I've seen the vendor invoices Jill provided. The math doesn't lie. You inflated costs and pocketed the difference. That's not a mental health issue, that's theft." Tuesday brought news that Sarah's professional life was beginning to suffer. Amanda worked in marketing at a company that often collaborated with Sarah's firm, and she'd heard rumors about the situation spreading through their professional network. People are questioning her judgment and integrity, Amanda told me. Not just about personal relationships, but about business dealings. If someone can systematically deceive their closest friend, what does that say about their professional ethics? Wednesday delivered the consequence I'd been hoping for most. Maya called to tell me that Sarah had reached out to her, attempting to borrow money for temporary cash flow issues. She said David's student loan payments were higher than expected, and they needed help covering rent until her next paycheck, Maya explained. But knowing what I know now, I told her I couldn't help. I also warned her that if she was having financial trouble, maybe she should return the money she stole from you. Sarah's financial situation was clearly more precarious than she'd let on. The honeymoon funded by my stolen money had been an investment in appearances she couldn't actually afford. Now, facing social consequences that might affect her professional opportunities, she was scrambling to maintain her lifestyle. Thursday brought the most satisfying development, a call from Marcus, the wedding photographer. I thought you should know that Sarah contacted me demanding that I edit your contributions out of the wedding video. He said, she wants all the footage that shows you coordinating with vendors or managing logistics removed before she shares. You have family. Can she do that? Technically, she's the client, so she can request edits. But I told her I need written justification for removing significant portions of the day's events, especially since those moments were part of the authentic wedding story. Marcus had refused to make the edits without a compelling reason, and Sarah couldn't provide one without admitting that my involvement had been extensive and essential. She's trying to erase you from her own wedding video, Marcus continued. It's honestly pathetic. The whole day only worked because of your coordination, and now she wants to pretend that never happened. Friday brought the email I'd been expecting since the confrontation at the cafe. Sarah had finally swallowed her pride enough to attempt what she thought was an apology. Dear Jill, it began. I've had time to reflect on our conversation and the recent misunderstandings in our social circle. I realize that some of my words may have come across as hurtful, and for that, I apologize. Weddings are stressful times that bring out the worst in everyone, and I clearly said things I didn't mean. The letter continued for 2 pages, carefully avoiding any admission of wrongdoing while attempting to reframe our conflict as a miscommunication between stressed friends. She offered to work together to repair the damage this misunderstanding has caused to both of our reputations. The final paragraph revealed her real motivation. I hope we can resolve this privately and help our mutual friends understand that this was all a big misunderstanding. I'm willing to meet with a counselor or mediator if that would help us move forward positively. I read the letter twice, marveling at Sarah's ability to apologize without actually acknowledging any specific wrongdoing. She was sorry for words that may have come across as hurtful, not sorry for deliberately cruel statements. She regretted the misunderstanding, not her intentional deception and theft. Most tellingly, she was focused on repairing both of our reputations, as if my honesty about her behavior had somehow damaged my standing rather than revealed her character. I showed the letter to Jennifer, my attorney, who laughed when she finished reading it. This is exactly what we see in settlement negotiations, she said. The non-apology apology that admits no fault while trying to make the consequences go away. She's hoping you'll accept blame for misunderstanding her actions instead of holding her accountable for them. I wrote back a brief response. Sarah, I appreciate you reaching out, but there's been no misunderstanding. You systematically exploited our friendship for financial gain, spoke cruelly about me to mutual friends, and showed no remorse when confronted. These aren't communication issues, they're character issues. I wish you well, but I have no interest in rebuilding a relationship that was never authentic. Sarah's response came within an hour, and the mask finally came off completely. Fine, Jill. You've made your point. You've embarrassed me publicly and cost me friendships and probably professional opportunities. I hope you're satisfied with your revenge. But remember that everyone will eventually see this for what it really is, a pathetic attempt by a lonely, desperate woman to punish someone for not wanting to be her friend anymore. You'll be the crazy ex-friend who couldn't let go. I saved this email as well, adding it to my evidence file. Even in our final communication, Sarah couldn't resist trying to rewrite history. In her version, she was the victim of my obsession rather than the perpetrator of financial and emotional exploitation. But her desperate attempts to control the narrative only reinforced what everyone was already learning. Sarah was exactly who I'd said she was. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel deflection proved the accuracy of my original account. The reckoning was complete. Sarah had lost friends, damaged her professional reputation, and revealed her true character to everyone who mattered. But more importantly, she'd lost the power to exploit generous people in our community. Future potential victims would be warned. Mutual friends would be cautious, and Sarah would face the consequences of her choices in every social interaction. Going forward, justice had been served not by a court, but by a community that had seen the truth and chosen to believe it. In the weeks following Sarah's final email, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep peace that comes from standing up for yourself and living authentically. The first sign of healing came when I stopped checking Sarah's social media obsessively. For months after the wedding, I'd been monitoring her posts, looking for evidence of the life she built with my money or signs that she felt guilty about her behavior. But suddenly I realized I hadn't looked at her profiles in days, and I didn't want to. Sarah's life was no longer my concern. Her happiness or unhappiness, her success or failure, her relationships and choices, none of it mattered to me anymore. I'd spent 8 years being hyper-aware of her needs and emotions, and breaking that habit felt like emerging from a fog I hadn't realized I'd been living in. The second sign was my relationship with money. I'd always been generous to the point of self-sacrifice, viewing my resources as tools for helping others even when I couldn't afford it. But losing $23,400 to Sarah forced me to examine why I equated my worth with my willingness to pay for other people's problems. I started saying no to financial requests, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. When my cousin asked for help with her credit card debt, I offered emotional support and budgeting advice instead of a check. When a neighbor needed money for car repairs, I helped her research affordable mechanics rather than covering the bill. Though the shift felt revolutionary, I was still helpful and generous, but within boundaries that protected my own financial security. I was giving from abundance rather than sacrifice, and people responded with more respect than they'd shown when I was an unlimited resource. The third change was in my social relationships. Losing Sarah had revealed how much of my social life had revolved around her needs and preferences. I'd attended events because she wanted company, joined activities because she was interested, and maintained friendships with people primarily because they were part of her circle. Without Sarah as a focal point, I had to figure out what I actually enjoyed and who I genuinely connected with. The process was sometimes lonely, but it was also liberating. I started a hiking group through a local Meet app and met Jennifer, a nurse practitioner who shared my love of nature photography. We bonded over early morning trail walks and conversations about everything except relationship drama. I joined a small business networking group and connected with Michelle, who ran a successful catering company and understood the challenges of freelance life. Our friendship developed around professional support and shared entrepreneurial experiences. I took a pottery class and found myself laughing easily with strangers who knew nothing about my history with Sarah. These new friendships felt different, lighter, more balanced, based on genuine compatibility rather than need or habit. The most surprising development was reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted away from during my years of Sarah-focused friendship. Maya and I started having regular coffee dates, rebuilding a connection that had been genuine before Sarah's influence. "I missed you," Maya told me one afternoon. The real you, not the version who was always stressed about Sarah's latest crisis. These words hit me powerfully. I'd lost myself so completely in managing Sarah's needs that even my oldest friends had noticed the change. Rediscovering who I Was outside of that dynamic felt like meeting myself for the first time in years. My business began thriving in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant emotional drain of Sarah's crises and financial demands, I had energy to pursue challenging projects and expand my client base. I redesigned my portfolio, raised my rates, and started saying no to work that didn't align with my values. The financial stability I'd always craved but sacrificed for others' emergencies became achievable when I stopped treating my bank account as a community resource. Within 6 months, I'd built back the emergency fund I'd depleted for Sarah, and was even considering buying a small house. But the most profound change was internal. I'd spent so many years defining myself through my relationships, how helpful I was, how needed I was, how much I could give that. I never developed a strong sense of individual identity. Learning to value myself for who I was rather than what I could provide felt like a complete personality reconstruction. I discovered opinions I never expressed, interests I never pursued, dreams I'd never prioritized. Without Sarah's approval as my primary goal, I was free to become someone I actually liked. The process wasn't always smooth. There were days when I missed the intensity of being needed, when my new boundaries felt cold compared to my old patterns of unlimited giving. There were moments when I questioned whether I'd been too harsh with Sarah, whether I could have handled things more compassionately. But these doubts were overwhelmed by a growing sense of authenticity and self-respect. I was becoming the person I'd always had the potential to be, rather than the person I thought I needed to be to earn love. 6 months after cutting contact with Sarah, I ran into David at a grocery store. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me, but nodded politely. "Jill, how are you?" "I'm well, David. How are you and Sarah?" He hesitated. "We single quotes adjusting. Marriage is an adjustment." I could see the stress in his face, the weight of whatever he'd learned about his wife's character. But his struggles weren't my responsibility anymore, and I felt no urge to offer help or advice. "I hope you both find happiness," I said sincerely, and meant it. Sarah's future wasn't my concern, but I genuinely hoped she'd learn to build relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. As I drove home from that encounter, I realized how complete my healing had become. Seeing David had triggered no emotional upheaval, no curiosity about Sarah's current situation, no regret about my choices. I'd moved on so completely that even reminders of my former life felt neutral. The most unexpected gift of this process was discovering my capacity for genuine friendship. Without the distortion of Sarah's exploitative dynamic, I learned what healthy relationships actually looked like. My new friends asked about my needs, respected my boundaries, and contributed equally to our connections. Jennifer, my hiking partner, checked in when I was sick without expecting me to solve her problems. In return, Michelle celebrated my business successes without immediately asking for favors or loans. These reciprocal relationships felt revolutionary after years of one-sided giving. I also learned to recognize red flags I'd previously ignored. When a new acquaintance immediately started sharing intense personal problems and hinting at financial needs, I politely declined to get involved. When someone showed up consistently late to plans but expected me to accommodate their schedule, I set clear boundaries instead of making excuses for them. The skills I developed for detecting manipulation and protecting my resources served me well beyond personal relationships. In business, I became better at identifying clients who would drain my energy without providing fair compensation. In family relationships, I learned to offer support without taking responsibility for other people's choices. Perhaps most importantly, I stopped apologizing for having boundaries. The old Jill would have felt guilty for saying no, would have over-explained her limitations, would have worried constantly about disappointing people. The new Jill understood that people who truly cared about me would respect my limits, and those who didn't weren't worth my energy. One evening, almost a year after the wedding, I was organizing my home office when I found the photo album I planned to give Sarah as a wedding gift. The pictures that had once felt like evidence of my foolishness now looked different. They showed a younger woman who'd been generous, loyal, and loving, even if she'd been naive about how those qualities could be exploited. I felt compassion for that younger version of myself, The woman who tried so hard to earn love through service. She'd been wrong about Sarah's character, but she hadn't been wrong about the value of generosity and loyalty. She just needed to learn that those beautiful qualities required boundaries to be sustainable. Instead of throwing the album away, I decided to keep it not as a reminder of betrayal, but as evidence of my capacity for love and my journey toward wisdom. The pictures documented not just a failed friendship, but my evolution from someone who gave without limits to someone who gave with intention. The healing process had taught me that my greatest strengths, my generosity, my loyalty, and my willingness to help didn't need to be abandoned after being exploited. They needed to be refined, protected, and shared more wisely. I was still the same person who wanted to support others and build meaningful connections, but now I was doing it from a place of strength rather than desperation. As I closed the album and placed it on a shelf, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the pain. Sarah's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the catalyst for becoming someone I genuinely respected. I'd learned to value myself, protect my resources, and build authentic relationships. The woman who'd been too embarrassing for Sarah's wedding party had become someone who no longer needed anyone's approval to feel worthy. That transformation was worth more than any friendship I'd lost or any money I'd never recover. 2 years after Sarah's wedding, I stood in my own home office, not a rented apartment, but a house I'd purchased with money I'd saved by learning the difference between generosity and enablement. The mortgage papers on my desk bore only my name, funded by a business that had flourished once I'd stopped treating my resources as community property. My graphic design company had grown beyond freelance work into a small agency with 3 employees. The success hadn't happened overnight, but it happened consistently, built on boundaries I'd learned to maintain and self-respect I'd finally developed. The knock on my door interrupted my thoughts about the quarterly reports I was reviewing. Through the window, I saw Maya holding a bottle of wine and wearing the smile that had first drawn me to her friendship in college, before Sarah had complicated everything. Celebrating the new contract? Maya asked as I opened the door, referring to the major client I'd landed that week, a nonprofit that appreciated both my creative skills and my business ethics. Always, I said, leading her to the kitchen where I'd learned to keep good wine for friends who reciprocated invitations. How was your date last night? Maya launched into a story about her evening with Tom, the teacher she'd been seeing for 3 months. I listened with genuine interest, offering opinions when asked and celebrating her happiness without feeling obligated to solve her problems or manage her relationship choices. This was what friendship looked like when both people were whole mutual. Support without exploitation, interest without dependency, care without control. Maya and I had rebuilt our connection on a foundation of equality, and it was stronger than anything I'd experienced during my Sarah years. Speaking of relationships, Maya said as we settled on my couch with our wine, I have news about Sarah. I felt a mild curiosity but no emotional charge. Oh? Emma told me she and David separated last month. Apparently, the financial stress got too intense, and he found out about some other money issues she hadn't told him about. I processed this information with the detachment of hearing about a distant acquaintance. Sarah's marriage troubles weren't my business, and I felt no satisfaction in her apparent struggles. That's unfortunate, I said sincerely. I hope they both find peace. Maya studied my face. You really don't care anymore, do you? I care in the way you care about any human being facing difficulty. But her choices and consequences aren't my responsibility. They never were, actually. I just thought they were. It's amazing how much you've changed, Maya observed. Not that you weren't wonderful before, but you're so much more ... yourself now. She was right. The woman Sarah had dismissed as boring and desperate had become someone who knew her own worth and lived according to her own values. I still helped others, but I chose when and how based on my capacity and their genuine need, not their manipulation or my need for validation. Just last week, I'd received a message from a stranger who'd seen my Facebook post about Sarah from 2 years ago. A woman named Claire had written to thank me for sharing my story because it had helped her recognize similar patterns in her own friendship with someone who'd been financially exploiting her. Reading about your experience gave me the courage To confront my friend about the money she owed me and the way she was treating me. Claire had written, "It's been hard, but I'm learning to value myself the way you did. Thank you for showing me that generosity should go both ways." These messages came occasionally women who'd recognized their own situations in my story and found strength to change their circumstances. They reminded me that speaking truth could protect others, even strangers. From the kind of exploitation I'd endured, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, my hiking partner. "Trail conditions perfect tomorrow. Morning. 7 a.m. at Sunset Point." I texted back my agreement, looking forward to another morning of friendship that asked nothing from me but my presence in conversation. Jennifer and I had been friends for over a year, and she never asked me for money, emotional labor beyond. Normal friendship or solutions to problems that were hers to solve. "I should head home," Maya said, checking her watch. "Tom's cooking dinner, and I actually want to be there on time because he's making an effort." I hugged her goodbye, appreciating the balance in her relationship with Tom, two people who chose to be together because they enhanced each other's lives, not because one needed what the other could provide. After Maya left, I sat in my quiet house and reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The woman who'd once defined herself through her usefulness to others had learned to value herself independently. The friend who'd accepted crumbs of appreciation in exchange for constant giving had built relationships based on mutual respect. I thought about the vendor testimonials sitting in a file upstairs, evidence of my competence and character that I'd never needed to use beyond that initial confrontation with Sarah's behavior. Those professionals had seen me clearly even when I couldn't see myself, recognizing qualities I'd been too busy apologizing for to appreciate. Most importantly, I'd learned that kindness didn't require self-sacrifice, that generosity could coexist with boundaries, and that love, real love, was never earned through payment or service. The people who mattered would value me for who I was, not what I could provide. My phone chimed with an email notification, a potential client interested in a logo redesign for their growing business. As I read through their requirements and budget, I felt the quiet confidence that had replaced my old desperation to please everyone. I would evaluate this project based on whether it aligned with my goals, whether the client seemed respectful and professional, and whether the compensation was fair for my expertise. Gone were the days of accepting any work that came my way, just as gone were the days of accepting any treatment that others offered. The woman who'd been too embarrassing for Sarah's wedding party had become someone who would never again apologize for taking up space, asking for respect, or expecting reciprocity in relationships. She'd learned that the right people would celebrate her presence rather than tolerate it, value her contributions rather than exploit them, and choose her company because they enjoyed who she was, not what she could give them. Standing in my own home, surrounded by friendships I'd chosen carefully and a business I'd built authentically, I felt the deep satisfaction of a life aligned with my values. Sarah's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also been the beginning of everything good that followed. I was no longer someone's ATM, therapist, or solution to problems that weren't mine to solve. I was simply Jill Valuable. For my own sake, worthy of respect and genuine affection, strong enough to stand alone, and wise enough to choose carefully who I allowed into my life. That was more than enough. That was everything.